Hey there, beautiful people. Welcome back to Mind-Blowing Stories. I'm your host, Grandpa John. And boy, oh boy, do I have a story for you today that'll knock your socks clean off. Before we dive in, I gotta ask you folks a favor. Now, I see my analytics here, and would you believe it? 96 of you wonderful people are watching without hitting that subscribe button. That just breaks this old man's heart. It really does. I pour my soul into these stories for you, and all I'm asking is for a little red button click. It's free, folks. Won't cost you a dime. So please hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and while you're at it, smash that like button if this story gets your heart pumping. I've got dozens and dozens of mind-blowing stories on this channel. Tales that'll make you laugh, cry, and question everything you thought you knew about life. All right, enough of my rambling. Let me tell you about myself first. I'm John Richardson, 67 years young, living here in sunny Phoenix, Arizona. Retired from 43 years as a mechanic. Worked on everything from rusty old Chevrolets to those fancy foreign cars the rich folks drive. Got these weathered hands to prove it too, covered in scars and calluses that tell their own stories. I started this channel because, well, when you get to be my age, you realize you've lived through some pretty incredible stuff. And most of it never gets told. People just take their stories to the grave, and that's a damn shame, if you'll pardon my French. So here I am, sharing the wild, unbelievable, but absolutely true tales from my 7 decades on this beautiful, crazy planet. Now, the story I'm about to tell you today, this one's special. This one's about the greatest love of my life, and I guarantee you'll never see the twists coming. So grab yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, and prepare to have your mind absolutely blown. It was the summer of 1978, and I was 22 years old, fresh out of trade school, and working at Murphy's Auto Repair on 5th Street in downtown Tucson. Ronald Reagan wasn't even president yet. Can you believe that? Carter was in the White House. Gas was expensive as hell even then, and everyone was still talking about that movie, Saturday Night Fever. Different times, folks. Simpler times. I was living in this tiny studio apartment above Mrs. Henderson's bakery, and let me tell you, waking up to the smell of fresh bread every morning wasn't the worst thing in the world. But I was lonely. 22, single, and spending most of my evenings reading books I'd borrowed from the Tucson Public Library. That's where I met her. Margaret. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because Tuesdays were slow at the shop, and Murphy always let me leave early. I was in the literature section, looking for something by Hemingway, when I dropped this heavy book on American history. The thing made a sound like a gunshot when it hit the floor, and every head in that quiet library turned to look at me. I was red as a tomato, folks, scrambling to pick up this book, when I heard this soft giggle. I looked up, and there she was. Margaret Collins, though I didn't know her name then. She was sitting at one of those wooden tables with the green reading lamps, and she had this smile that could have lit up the whole library. Auburn hair pulled back in a neat bun, green eyes that sparkled with mischief, and she was wearing this yellow sundress that made her look like sunshine itself. "Need some help there, Butterfingers?" she whispered, and her voice had this slight southern accent that made my heart skip a beat. Now, I should mention something important here, folks. Margaret was wearing a wedding ring. A big, expensive-looking diamond that caught the light every time she moved her hand. But in that moment, seeing that smile, hearing that voice, I'm ashamed to say the ring didn't slow me down one bit. "I'm usually much smoother than this," I whispered back, which made her giggle again. "I find that hard to believe," she said, and there was this playful challenge in her voice that made me grin like an idiot. We spent the next 2 hours talking in hushed whispers between those library shelves. She told me she worked there part-time, that she loved books more than anything in the world, especially mysteries and romance novels. I told her about fixing cars, about how every engine had its own personality, its own problems to solve. Sounds boring now, but she listened like I was describing the secrets of the universe. When closing time came around, I worked up the courage to ask if she'd like to get coffee sometime. Her face went serious then, and she twisted that wedding ring around her finger. "I can't," she said. But the way she said it, there was regret there, real regret. "I understand," I said, even though my heart was breaking a little. "But maybe I'll see you here again, when you're working?" She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe you will." And folks, that's how it started. The most beautiful, complicated, heartbreaking love story of my life. Over the next few weeks, I became a regular at that library. I'd show up every Tuesday and Thursday when Margaret was working, always with some excuse about needing a book for something. She'd help me find what I was looking for, and we'd end up talking for hours. I learned that she'd grown up in Georgia, that she'd moved to Tucson after marrying her husband Richard, and that she felt trapped in a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow inside. Richard Collins owned 3 car dealerships around Tucson. Rich guy, important guy, the kind of man who wore expensive suits and belonged to the country club. He was 15 years older than Margaret, and from what she carefully didn't say, I got the impression their marriage was more about his status and her security than any real love. "He's not a bad man," she told me one afternoon, as we sat in the mystery section, pretending to discuss Agatha Christie. He doesn't see me. Not really. I'm like a beautiful vase he bought to decorate his life." My heart ached for her, folks. Here was this brilliant, funny, passionate woman who loved books and had dreams of maybe writing one herself someday, and she was slowly disappearing in a mansion in the foothills. The turning point came in September. I was under the hood of a '72 Buick when Margaret walked into Murphy's shop. She'd never come to my work before, and seeing her there in her nice dress, looking so out of place among the grease and tools, I knew something was different. "John," she said, and her voice was shaking, "I need to talk to you." Murphy was in the back office, so we had a moment of privacy. She told me that Richard was going to be out of town for a week on business, something about opening a new dealership in Phoenix. "I know this is wrong," she whispered, tears starting in her eyes. "I know I'm married, and I know you're a good man who doesn't deserve to be mixed up in this mess. But John, I think I'm falling in love with you." Folks, I want you to understand something. This was 1978, not 2025. People took marriage vows seriously back then, even bad marriages. What Margaret was saying, what she was offering, it took incredible courage. I took her hands in mine, right there in that dirty garage, and I told her the truth. "Margaret, I fell in love with you the day you laughed at me dropping that book. Whatever you want to do, whatever you need from me, I'm here." That week was the most incredible 7 days of my young life. Margaret would come over to my little apartment after she finished at the library, and we'd cook dinner together on my tiny stove, listen to records on my beat-up stereo, and talk until the sun came up. She'd bring books to read aloud to me. Poetry, mostly, though I remember she had this thing for Edgar Allan Poe that I never quite understood. But it wasn't just about the romance, folks. Margaret was smart, scary smart. She could talk about history, literature, politics, anything. She challenged me to think about things I'd never considered, made me want to be better than I was. And when she looked at me, really looked at me, I felt like the most important person in the world. Of course, the week ended. Richard came back, and Margaret had to go back to playing the perfect wife. But something had changed between us. We couldn't pretend anymore that we were just friends who met at the library. For the next 2 years, from 1978 to 1980, we carried on this secret affair. I'm not proud of it, folks. I know adultery is wrong, and there were nights I'd lie awake feeling guilty as hell. But I was young, and I was desperately in love. And Margaret. Margaret was drowning in that marriage. We'd meet wherever we could. Sometimes at my apartment, when Richard was at the dealership. Sometimes we'd drive out to the desert and just sit in my beat-up Camaro, talking and holding hands while we watched the sunset. Once, we even rented a motel room in Phoenix and pretended we were husband and wife for a whole weekend. Margaret signed the register as Mrs. Richardson, and for 2 days I got to imagine what our life could be like if things were different. But here's where the story takes its first real twist, folks. In March of 1980, Margaret came to me with news that changed everything. She was pregnant. Now, before you start doing math in your heads, let me explain. Richard had been having some health problems. Let's just say that for the past 6 months, he and Margaret hadn't been intimate as husband and wife. But she'd been with me, and we both knew that baby was mine. "What are we going to do?" she asked, and I could see the panic in her eyes. I told her we'd figure it out. Maybe it was time to come clean, to tell Richard the truth and face the consequences. Maybe she could get a divorce, and we could get married and raise our child together. I was making decent money at the shop by then, and Murphy had been talking about making me a partner. But Margaret had a different idea. "Richard doesn't know he can't have children," she said. "The doctors told him it was just a temporary problem from the stress of expanding the business. If I tell him I'm pregnant, he'll think it's his." It felt wrong to me, folks, but Margaret was terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. Richard was powerful, connected. He could make life very difficult for both of us. And she was scared. Scared of losing everything, scared of the scandal, scared of what people would say. So that's what we did. Margaret told Richard she was pregnant, and he was over the moon. Suddenly, the distant husband became the doting father-to-be. He bought baby clothes, had the spare room converted into a nursery, told everyone at the country club about the heir he was finally going to have. And me, I had to stand on the sidelines and watch the woman I loved carry my child while pretending to be happy for another man. Elizabeth, that's what they named her, Elizabeth Collins, was born on November 15th, 1980. Margaret sent me a photo secretly, and folks, that little girl was the spitting image of me. Same dark hair, same stubborn chin, even the same little dimple in her left cheek that I'd had since I was born. But here's the thing about life. Just when you think you've got everything figured out, it throws you a curveball that changes everything. In January of 1981, 2 months after Elizabeth was born, Richard had a massive heart attack at the dealership. Dead at 52, just like that. Suddenly, Margaret was a widow with a newborn baby and 3 car dealerships to run. And suddenly, our secret affair didn't have to be secret anymore. I thought this was our chance, folks. I really did. I showed up at her house 3 days after the funeral with flowers and hope in my heart. We could be together now, I told her. We could be a real family, raise our daughter together, maybe even expand the business together. But Margaret looked at me like I was a stranger. "John," she said, and her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "I can't see you anymore." I thought I'd misheard her. "What do you mean?" "Margaret, we can be together now. No more sneaking around, no more lies." She shook her head, and I could see she'd been crying, but her jaw was set in that stubborn way I knew so well. Do you have any idea what people would say if I started seeing someone so soon after Richard's death? And not just anyone, a mechanic. They'd say I was a gold-digging whore who was cheating on my husband while he was alive. I don't care what people say, I told her, but she cut me off. Well, I do. I have a daughter to think about now, John. Elizabeth is going to inherit those dealerships someday. She's going to have every advantage in life, the best schools, the best opportunities. But only if I protect her reputation. Only if I protect our family's good name. It hit me then, what she was really saying. I wasn't good enough. I never had been. I was fine for a secret affair, fine for excitement and passion when she was trapped in a loveless marriage. But when it came to building a real life, a respectable life, I didn't measure up. So that's it? I asked. 2 years mean nothing. 2 years mean everything, she whispered, tears finally starting to fall. But Elizabeth means more. I left Arizona 3 weeks later. Couldn't stand to be in the same town, seeing Margaret's name in the newspaper business section, knowing my daughter was growing up just a few miles away, without knowing who her real father was. I moved to Colorado, got a job at a garage in Denver, met a wonderful woman named Carol 2 years later, a nurse, kind and gentle, and nothing like Margaret. We got married in 1984, had 2 kids of our own, Michael in 1985 and Sarah in 1987. Carol never knew about Margaret and Elizabeth. How could I explain that I'd left part of my heart in Arizona? Don't get me wrong, folks. I loved Carol. She was a good woman, a good wife, a good mother. We had 34 happy years together before the cancer took her in 2018. But there was always this shadow in my life, this what if that I carried with me everywhere. I kept track of Elizabeth as best I could from a distance. This was before the internet, remember, so it wasn't easy. But I'd get newspaper clippings from friends who still lived in Tucson, little bits of information about how she was doing. Valedictorian of her high school class. Full scholarship to Stanford. Graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. Came back to Tucson and took over the dealerships when she turned 25. She looked more and more like me as she got older, from what I could see in the grainy newspaper photos. That stubborn Richardson chin, those dark eyes. I wondered if Margaret ever looked at her and thought about me, about us, about what we'd had. In 2010, I heard that Margaret had remarried, some doctor from Phoenix, a good match everyone said. I was happy for her, truly. She deserved to be loved properly, but it still stung, you know. Knowing that she'd found someone worthy of her after all those years. Then, in 2018, the same year Carol died, I got some news that shook me to my core. Margaret had cancer, ovarian cancer, the aggressive kind. She had maybe 6 months to live. I wrestled with it for weeks, folks. Should I reach out? Should I let sleeping dogs lie? Carol had just died. I was grieving, and stirring up old feelings seemed like a recipe for disaster. But in the end, love won. I drove from Denver to Tucson, not knowing what I'd find or what I'd say. Margaret was in hospice care at home. That big mansion in the foothills I'd never been allowed to enter. Her second husband, Thomas, was a good man. He let me visit when Margaret asked to see me. She was thin, so thin, but those green eyes were still bright, still sharp. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told me about her books. She'd finally written that mystery novel she'd always dreamed about, published it under a pen name. It had done pretty well too. And then she told me something that changed everything. "John," she said, holding my hand with what little strength she had left, "I need to tell you about Elizabeth, about our daughter." Our daughter. After 38 years, she finally admitted it out loud. "She knows," Margaret whispered. "I told her the truth when she turned 30. About you, about us, about everything. She's been wanting to meet you for years, but I was too proud, too scared. I felt like I'd been hit by lightning, folks. My daughter knew about me, had known for years. She's married now," Margaret continued. "Has 2 kids of her own, your grandchildren. She kept the Collins name for business reasons, but John. She has your eyes, your stubborn streak, your way of seeing right through to the heart of things." Margaret died 3 days later. I held her hand as she passed, and her last words were, "Tell Elizabeth I'm sorry for everything." The funeral was huge. Half of Tucson showed up to pay their respects to Margaret Collins, businesswoman, philanthropist, pillar of the community. I sat in the back, just another mourner, watching as Elizabeth gave the eulogy. She was beautiful, folks. 40 years old, confident, successful, and so much like me it took my breath away. She talked about her mother's strength, her generosity, her love of books and learning. But when her eyes swept the crowd and landed on me in the back row, I saw something else there. Recognition, question, hope. After the service, she found me in the parking lot. "You must be John," she said, and her voice had that same slight musical quality Margaret's had, but with my straightforward way of speaking. "And you must be Elizabeth," I replied, not sure whether to shake her hand or hug her or what. She solved the problem by stepping forward and wrapping me in the tightest hug I'd ever received. "I have so many questions," she whispered against my shoulder. That was 7 years ago, folks. 7 years of getting to know the daughter I never got to raise, of being grandpa to little Margaret, named after her grandmother, and Joseph, named after me. 7 years of family dinners and birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Elizabeth is nothing like I imagined, and exactly what I hoped for. She's brilliant in business, but also has Margaret's love of reading. She's tough when she needs to be, but has a soft heart for strays and underdogs. She kept the Collins name for business, but her kids call me Grandpa John, and that's worth more to me than any name on a birth certificate. But here's the thing that really gets me. The thing that makes this whole story so bittersweet. Elizabeth told me that Margaret kept every letter I wrote, but never sent. Every photo she secretly took of me at town events over the years. Every newspaper clipping about me from when I opened my own garage in Denver. She loved you until the day she died, Elizabeth told me. She just didn't know how to choose love over fear. And you know what? I understand it now. I'm 67 years old. I've lived long enough to understand that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes fear wins, and pride wins, and the weight of other people's expectations wins. Margaret made the choices she thought were best for Elizabeth, even if they weren't best for us. Do I wish things had been different? Every single day. Do I regret loving her? Not for 1 second. So there you have it, folks. My mind-blowing love story. The greatest love of my life. The daughter I never knew I had. And the grandchildren who've made my golden years truly golden. Life is funny, isn't it? You think you know how your story is going to end, and then it surprises you with a whole new chapter when you least expect it. Speaking of surprises, I've got dozens more stories like this one on the channel. Stories about the time I accidentally ended up in a police chase, the ghost that haunted my childhood home, the lottery ticket that changed everything for my neighbor. Each one guaranteed to blow your mind. But I need your help to keep telling these stories. Remember, 96 of you are watching without subscribing, and that just breaks this old man's heart. If this story touched you, if it made you think about your own life and loves, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, it helps me out tremendously, and it means I can keep sharing these incredible tales with all of you. And please leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought about Margaret and Elizabeth. Tell me about your own love stories, the ones that got away, the ones that found you when you least expected it. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire mine. Don't forget to hit that like button too. It really helps with the algorithm, and I'm still figuring out all this YouTube stuff at my age. Until next time, this is Grandpa John reminding you that every life is full of mind-blowing stories. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to tell them. Thanks for listening, beautiful people. I'll see you in the next one.